Good evening, participants. Now we are playing ICAI motto song. I request all to put their right hand on their heart. Now I request Chairman of Ahmedabad branch on this historic and landmark day to give his opening remark. Kanil Vaisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishen Bhai. On behalf of Ahmedabad branch of WRC of ICAI, I take immense pleasure to welcome CA Amit Bajaj from Mumbai, CA Chintan Patel, Regional Council member and also the Chairman of the Indias and Accounting Committee of Ahmedabad branch of WRC of ICAI, always known for bringing all the relevant programs that too very well structured. Why I'm saying so, I'll just justify in few minutes to come. The Secretary of our branch, CA Bishan Shahji, who is always there to support shoulder by shoulder for all the programs. CA Shamir Asarji, the coordinator for the session. And all the members, I welcome you all to this very important session today evening, which is going to cover on India's amendment rules, along with that, the rent concessions, and along with that also the recent notification which came on 24th of July. Now, before we move ahead with respect to that, also one very nice and knowledge enriched webinar series has been organized by Ahmedabad branch, or you can say by Chintan Bhai, that is on Ind AS, from where since from basics to the advanced level everything is going to be discussed. I would request Chintan Bhai to throw a light on that once he is introducing this session also, which is planned from 24th of August. Soon, within a day or so, you will receive a mail of that. All the renowned speakers from all over the India are joining for that. So I don't think that any of the member of Ahmedabad should miss out that opportunity. Also, seeing the overwhelming response to DTRC, we have opened day-wise sessions so that relevant sessions can be attended by their interested sessions can be attended by members. So now that facility is also available. And apart from our professional programs, certain CSR activities are also going on. Right now, the tree plantation drive is going on. So you all can again participate in that. The details with respect to the same has been mailed to all the members. With this brief words, I again welcome Amit Bajaj on behalf of Ahmedabad branch. And I now request CA Chintan Patel to take the session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman of the branch, for right tone of the session. CA Vishan Shah, Secretary of the Ahmedabad branch, faculty of the today's session, CA Amit Bajaj from Mumbai, coordinator of these particular topics, CS Samir Ashar, and all participants. Good evening, all of you. See, COVID-19 has really made a huge impact on the lives of everyone. The due dates have been extended for all sorts, whether it's a SEBI, whether it's MCA, or whether it's income tax. However, one very important change was the corner for all India's professionals and auditors that was introduced on 24th July 2020. This change was arise because of the change in the IFRS, because India is completely based on IFRS. So the predominant reason of change during this particular time is because of the COVID-19. And one of the most important change which is affecting everyone, which we have to take care cautiously, is on India's 116 for rent concession arrangements. Because in this situation, a lot of cases or majority of cases, the lease rentals concessions are provided because that is the need of ours for all lessees. So how to do accounting for these lease concessions by lessee, and along with that, very important changes on materiality definition of business, and other financial instruments related aspects are also being covered. So this was completely new. 24th July it was announced, and when I discussed with my committee members, CSB Choksi and others, they suggested there is a need to have a discussion and debate on this particular topic. Very importantly on rent concession, because there are a lot of issues are there, a lot of controversy is there, and we all want the practical examples of competition of the rent concessions arrangement in the books of accounts, because Q1 is now around the corner and everybody wants to understand how it can be impacted in financials. So with this objective, this particular session was organized. As chairman has rightly pointed out, that Ind AS refresher course has been launched, and this was the need of our Ind AS has been there since for more than 3 years, but however there is a need to have a learning, relearning and learning. Then it's a continuous process. So with the objective of the Ind AS under is a refresher course. So what we try to do, we are trying to have the understanding and coverage of the most important topics which are the most relevant and very important and very useful for every professionals. So if you are eyeing to really enter into Ind AS, even if you have missed the bus, don't worry. This is the right time for you to enter in the bus. If you really want to brush up your knowledge, if you really want to apply practical issues, don't worry. This is the right time for you to enter this particular course. So this Ind AS refresher course is much detailed. I can't say it's detailed because Ind AS IFRS is ocean. Whatever we do is less. So still what we have tried is that in the Ind AS refresher course of sessions, 3 hours in each session. So there are 24 CP hours of the complete detail Ind AS refresher course has been designed. And we are sure that with this objective, everybody at Ahmedabad branch and across all region, they will be able to benefit from this particular course. And so within few days, as chairman has actually pointed out, that within few days you will get the announcement, and I expect that please take this particular benefit. This is the first time we are in Ahmedabad branch, we are organizing the detailed Ind AS refresher course, and this is a stepping stone for all of us. Now, not taking much time here, let me introduce the today's faculty. He is Amit Kumar Bajaj. He is a partner of Grant Thornton India LLP. He has experience of more than 15 years in the audit and advisory services. He leads the international audit practice and healthcare sector in their firm in India. He has extensive experience in internationally operating companies, mostly medium and large size. His experience ranges across sectors including life sciences and healthcare, automotive, paper, energy, ITS, infrastructure industries. So he has also advised on various critical issues of revenue recognitions, leases, taxes, business combinations, supporting financial instruments. So with this brief word and brief introduction, I welcome Shri Amit Bajaj for this video session. And now I hand over the charge to Amit ji. Before that, Vishen, you want to say something? Vishen bhai?
Yes, Chintan bhai.
Vishen, you are audible. Yeah.
Yes.
Please.
Okay. Yes. Now I request Samir bhai to share a few words. Kindly unmute yourself. Kindly unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Samir Asher, and I'm a chartered accountant. And I have been working into audits throughout my career. I have more than 9 years of experience in audit taxation. I've done limited reviews, I've done stat audits, I've done SOX assignments, and I have sector experience in all the sectors, be it pharmaceuticals or be it healthcare or be it engineering. So yeah, thank you.
I request Amit ji to take the session forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bishan Bhai. Thank you, Chintan Bhai, and thank you, Fenil Bhai. It's been pleasure to be here to present the recent amendments to the fellow colleagues in Ahmedabad market. I think recent changes have been very timely and very important for the current environment in which we are living. COVID has impacted everybody. I think no business is paid, and some of the changes which we are going to discuss are very relevant in this scenario. I think international bodies as well as ICAI and NFRA has been quite proactive in bringing out these changes to help companies and accountants to prepare the financial statements which give true and fair view, and at the same time can take certain practical experience to not I mean, we always had this theme, that cost versus benefit analysis, right? And that's where that's what CAs are famous for, to bring that analysis out, and that's exactly has been applied from a reporting standpoint also, to bring out that part in the form of practical experience to say where does it make sense to do all the modification, or can I bring out a practical experience or not. And that's where the changes to leases and some of the other things were brought in. I hope the screen is visible to everyone. Just check before I start the presentation. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So in today's session, we're going to cover leases, the key changes to lease standard. There's a change in business combination standard. These are some narrow scope amendments which have been brought primarily to address the definition of business, some of the other tests which can be applied in a more simplified manner to conclude whether a transaction is a business or not. Then there has been certain changes to financial instrument standards. I'm sure you all are aware that the LIBOR is now going out. With LIBOR going out, there will be a change in the benchmark rate, and that has a significant impact on your hedge accounting. And because companies were following hedge accounting rules, and at the time of initial inception, they would have designated them as hedges. With this change, most of the hedges will become ineffective because the benchmark rate has changed. So that's where IASB, and then now adopted by Indian Companies Act as well, and this change has been brought by MCA also, to allow benchmarking rate change and not make them ineffective from a hedge accounting standpoint. Then change in the definition of materiality has impacted number of accounting standards, starting from presentation to provision. So we're going to discuss each of them as part of this session to see how those have to be taken into account and how those changes will impact the ultimate report. Starting with Ind AS 116. So usually under Ind AS 116, if there is a change in the original terms and conditions of a lease, then the lessee is required to reassess the lease, whether it is a modification or a change. If they conclude that it is a modification, then they need to apply the lease accounting standards modification rule, which would mean that the cash flows from this date to the end of the lease term has to be recalculated, and the discount rate which is applicable on the date of modification has to be used to calculate the right of use asset and related liability. In the current scenario, when there are so many negotiations and renegotiations are happening with lessors for rent concessions, for deferment of leases, for restructuring of leases where it can be variable versus fixed, etc. Changing each and every lease and trying to apply modification was a very onerous task on the companies. As such, everybody is working in a virtual environment, and with this reporting complication, cost versus benefit analysis was not working out clearly. That's where the standard setters came out and said that if you are able to satisfy certain conditions within the scheme of modification, then you can technically apply a practical expedient. What does that practical expedient say is what something which we will look at. So number one, the practical expedient says that the lease payments due on or before 30th June 2021 only can be taken from a rent concession standpoint, right? That's number one. Number two, no lease modification assessment for COVID-19 related rent concession, which means any leases which were due on or before 30th June 2021, and there was a modification which has happened in the terms, then you don't have to apply lease modification rules. And once you take this option, the fact, obviously, right, this is a very natural fallout of any of our presentations, which is once you have taken a position, those needs to be disclosed. So therefore, the standard setter has said that you need to disclose the fact that you have exercised an option, which is a practical expedient, which has been given to you, plus the amount charged in the profit or loss account as a result of adopting this practical expedient, which would mean that the rent concession which you have received, that number has to be presented in the financial statement as a note in the footnote saying that this is the amount which has been received by the company or an entity in the form of rent concession. Then the exemption to disclose the effect of adopting the amendment is being given. So as you all are aware that under Ind AS 8, any change or amendment which you are doing by account of new standard, if the transitional provisions are not there, you need to also disclose the impact of that had this particular practical expedient been not taken, right? So that is the requirement. So that exemption has been given that you only need to present the amount of the rent concession. You don't have to do the calculation. See, there was no fun, right? When a practical expedient has been taken, to not to work out so many workings relating to practical expedient. But if you have to still disclose that in the financial statement and still do the working, then the entire impact or effect of that essence was going away, and therefore this amendment was also brought in to say that your Ind AS 8 related disclosures are also relaxed. Let's spend some time here to understand how does this practical expedient impacts on our day-to-day reporting, or what kind of challenges we can have here. Number one, this is an optional. That means companies need not necessarily take this route from a lease modification assessment standpoint. They can very well apply lease modification standard and do the normal Ind AS 116 accounting as required by the standard without taking this practical experience. Number one. Number two, this is applicable only for COVID-19 related rent concession, and that too leases falling due on or before 30th June 2021. So this is a very limited period exemption which has been given. It is not a blanket amendment which has been brought. This is a very limited period assessment which has been brought out to help companies report in a much more quicker and faster way. And therefore this particular expedient cannot be applied to any related, or analogy cannot be drawn to any related activity in future or in past. So that's one which has to be clearly taken into account. Now the question is, what happens if somebody is applying IFRS or Ind AS 101 or first time adoption of Ind AS? What should those companies do with respect to this practical expedient, and what all rents will be covered here? This will so under Ind AS 101, this can also be applied only for this limited period, whatever concessions has been received, to be accounted in the profit and loss account. What it does is, whatever concession you have, or whatever concession an entity has received for these 3 months or up to 30th June 2021, when I say 3 months, it is more starting from April 1, but I think periods relating to March will also get impacted, and those benefits also you would have received probably as part of this scheme or this arrangement. So even that can be directly taken into profit and loss account without doing a lease modification accounting, by making certain disclosures as required by the standard. Thereby you can continue to do the depreciation of right of use asset as well as you can continue to square off your liabilities as and when you are making those payments. This benefit which you have received can be parked directly in profit and loss account because that's the saving which the company has done. So that is the overall summary of the practical experience. Again, the early application is permitted with retrospective adjustment to be made in the retained earnings. What it says is that can I early adopt? It's more related to companies whose accounting periods are say falling on June 30th. So can I apply this because this is a change which is happening because the amendment has come now, and then these are standard generally applicable from 1st of April, or somebody who has an accounting year starting from 1st of January, this will come in between. Can they also apply this? Because usually the amendments and changes are applicable from a certain accounting period starting date, right? So that's where they have again provided a practical, they've taken a practical view to say that an early application is permitted for say, things like for March related items can be also taken into account. To take a quick snapshot, we'll quickly run through the snapshot here. I'll stop here for some quick questions if one has around this, and then we will get to the more practical examples relating to this. So if you look at the overview, so there are 4 steps required here. First, the rent concession occur as a direct consequence of COVID. So this is only limited for COVID situation, as we discussed. Second, the change results in revised consideration per lease that is substantially the same or less than the consideration per lease immediately preceding the change. That means they should receive some form of concession or reduction. Reduction in lease payment affect only payment originally due on or before 30th June 2021. Amounts due post June are not part of this amendment and therefore may be required to look at that separately. There is no substantive change to other terms and conditions of the lease. So what it means is that this practical experience can be applied only for rent concession. If there are any other terms and conditions relating to lease are significantly changed, then you need to or you ought to apply modification. It cannot be seen that because one of these is applied and in disguise of that you bring in something else also as part of this amendment and try and escape the modification accounting. That is not allowed. It has to be primarily substantively, other terms has to remain changed. It's only the payment relaxation for which this has been applied. And then second, obviously the companies have to choose that to apply this practical expedient or not. And once they choose that they want to apply, then this can be directly taken into profit and loss account as variable lease. And if they choose not to apply this, then they need to apply modification accounting, wherein right of use asset and related liability will be readjusted. So I'll stop here for some quick questions, and then we'll get to examples.
Yeah, Amit, we can have a question answer at the end.
At the end, okay, fine, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, let's take the first illustration. The accounting for payments deferred and then increased at a future date. If you see here, a lease has a monthly payment of 1,000 rupees. And the lessor has agreed to defer 6 months of lease payment from 2020 to 2021 as a result of COVID-19, right? Assumes an interest at the rate of 80 per month. So he's charging interest for the deferral he is giving, and 6 months increased lease payment because he has given a 6 months extension. The remaining 6 months he's saying you pay me 2,000 rupees for the remaining period, right? And continue until September 2021 so that he is able to recover his due. So here the only thing which is happening is there is a deferment of lease payment. He is not forgiving anything. He is only deferring the current period because to help him ease with the cash flow, and at the same time he's charging an interest of 80 rupees per month, which is at a very nominal rate at which he is charging like 8%, so that he is able to recover the cash flow deferment which he has received. So for an unsecured loan at an 8% seems to be very reasonable number, right? So how should the company account for this? Since there is no liability which is paid in the current period, there will not be any accounting for that, and therefore I've written an accounting entry, because systems will have a natural entry to post if it is an automated one. So you make that as a nil and nil. And for the interest accrual, you will make a interest accrual during this period, because 80 rupees is charged for this period as an interest. So that's the interest which you need to accrue for this period. And then whenever there is a payment which will happen here, that's the 2000 rupees you will debit your liability and credit your cash, and then accordingly interest payouts will also happen here. So interest on the profit, and then the lease liability will be credited to the extent of 80 rupees. So if you see here, if modification accounting has to be applied here, because you have practically changed the terms here by charging an interest and also by deferring the lease payment, you need to rerun this as of the change date, which is here, it is 1st April 2021. Historically, I would have say applied a 10% discount rate, right, or a 8% discount rate to discount my cash flows. With the revised cash flow, I may have to now take a revised rate for the property as of the current date, which might be higher than the 10% or lower than the 10%. So your cash flows will get discounted at a rate different than what you would have taken originally, because that is not something which is revisited on a yearly basis. So this modification will primarily trigger a change in your discount rate, and therefore change your liability and ROU value to that extent, to the change of discount rate. So that's the first impact, where only deferment is happening, with a charge of interest rate results in a modification. If you apply the existing standard, you will end up changing your ROU and liability value to the tune of discount rate. By this practical expedient, you don't have to apply that, and therefore you only accrue for whatever is payable to you, and then make those payments whenever they are been under the revised payment plan, right? Amortization and other things will continue as usual, because those values are intact, and you do not have to stop the amortization of ROU during the lockdown or during the concession period. They will continue to be recorded in a normal course of business. The second one, which is more common, which is the rent rebate. What happens when a company gets a rebate on a monthly rent, and how should that be accounted? So here, if you see, and there will be a lot of retail spaces which will enjoy this kind of benefit, because they were completely shut down, and I think the way currently the discussions are going on, a lot of them will get a rent rebate in some form or the other. So rent rebate practically means is that you are liable to pay the rent, but I'm giving you a 50% off, or a 20% off, or a 25% off on your existing rental, and thereby giving you a rebate here, right? So that's the change which we are talking about. It's not the forgiving the entire rent for that month. It's only you have to pay me the rent, but at a reduced rate. That's what the change here. That's what I've considered in this illustration. So here, what happens is whether the first question is, we need to evaluate whether this is a modification or not. As I said, since it is a rebate and it is different from the original change, this will account for a modification, because your original terms and conditions relating to payment have changed, and therefore had you applied the original accounting, the revised cash flows have to be discounted at a new discount rate. So both of that will get impacted, and therefore you will have a lower right of use asset and a lower liability coming on account of this change. However, if you apply the practical expedient here, here I've presented in terms of how each of the 4 conditions are satisfied here. There are no substantive changes to other terms and conditions other than the payment part. The entity will account the rent rebate which they have received. Here it says 1000 rupees as a benefit in profit and loss account immediately. or it should be over the 3-month period or 6 months period is something which has to be taken as a, that is something which has not been clarified by the standard. Looking at the framework, this has to be spread across the benefit period. So if it's a 6-month or a 5-month, whatever is the benefit period over which they have received it, it has to be a portion that income benefit has to be taken over that period. It is what my view would be, because it needs to be reflective of the period for which this benefit has been received. And these benefits you will enjoy as and when you will make the payments for those months rent. And if there is any other termination or any other things which are triggered prior to you actually getting this benefit, I don't think many of the lessees will enjoy that benefit, and therefore it will be prudent to account for this benefit over a period over which these benefits are received.
Yeah, Amit, I just sorry to interpret at this juncture, because
Sure.
this is actually a really practical situation and difficulty for all of us. Said
Yes.
that how to account, because what is happening here is that we are not sure, we are not clear. There is no guidance available that in this case how to recognize the benefit. So I think body suggested is that having matching concept wherein my expenditure is already being recognized higher, and then in that period I can have this kind of income recognized. So that income recognition can be equal also, right?
It has to be equal in my view. You cannot recognize as a one-time number. Say for example, this rebate benefit is for 6 months, right? So then you need to accrue this over 6 months period. Then you need to accrue this over 6 months period. You cannot recognize everything in 1 month saying that this is the amount which now I have received, so I'll fully recognize this. That is not right, because if you see the lease terms, what will you see is that in case there is a force majeure or any other termination which is happening, this rent rebate will not accrue to the company because they have actually exited the lease, right? And there are a lot of shops which are closing down. So this benefit which you have recognized will be required to be reversed, because you are, this is primarily a less payout you are making to your lessor, right? It is not that he is giving you any payment out of his pocket. And therefore this has to be recognized equally over the period over which this benefit has been extended.
Yes, I think that sounds good, that we need to go through patching concept, which is already recognized, and wherein we need to have a cost and income both there, so that my overall cost is reduced. But however, when I look at the equal, so because my cost is by way of applying my effective interest rate method, because in my unwinding of my liability is not equal over the period. So whether the income should be recognized equal over the period or not?
It can be recognized equally over the period, because you get a fixed benefit on your rent amount. So if you see the ROU setup, that is more on an EMI model, because there is a fixed element. You are separating out a interest portion and a principal portion and then taking a fair value concept. Here there is no fair valuation which is applied. Here it is an absolute amount which you get over a 6-month period or a year, and that is the amount which you need to equally, because that's how it will be structured. However, if somebody gives you a benefit, so first month 25%, second month 50%, third month 35%, if there is a graded thing, or depending upon the impact it had on account of lockdown, if they have a varied say April month I'll give you 50%, for May I'll give you 25%, for June I'll give you say another 25%, then accounting can follow that. So for April you can account for 50%, for May 25%, for June 25%, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so are we applying Ind AS 109 for this purpose, or we are applying the Ind AS framework? Because ultimately liability is reduced. So my liability is a financial liability, and that financial liability is governed under Ind AS 109. So whether the financial liability reimbursement is happening here, and then we are recognizing gain by financial liability?
No, so what we are doing is right now we are only applying Ind AS 116 practical expedient. 109 is still not triggered here, because as long as 116 is applied, you still don't have to trigger 109 for the purpose of accounting. This was for the purpose of recognizing how exactly this has to be recognized in profit and loss account. I am using the framework concept to say that this has to be on a matching basis and should reflect the terms on which you have received this benefit. So some element of 115 has also been brought into it.
Okay, thank you.
So I've put down slides in terms of what kind of effect this particular item will have. I'll just leave this for a minute for you to digest this. The effect on lease liability, as I said, if you apply practical expedient, then there is no impact on that. However, if you do not apply practical expedient, you will have a reduced liability because your discount rate and liability both has reduced, right? Similarly, on the discount rate will get updated depending on the scenario, what you would have taken when you have originally set up the lease versus what is the current rent rate or current discount rate. The cash flows will change to that effect. Right of use asset will also be in line with liabilities. If your liabilities are getting reduced, your right of use asset will also get reduced to that effect. And on account of profit and loss account, if you apply lease modification accounting, there is no impact on the profit and loss account immediately. The impact will be in the form of reduced interest rate and or increased interest rate or finance charge and the depreciation amount. The other things will set off in itself. However, if you apply practical expedient, there is immediate gain which is flowing through your profit and loss account, right? So that is something which will come in here. So the important question here is from a taxation standpoint also, one has to be clearly aware of this. I don't know if that has been, I think still tax standard has not been harmonized to assess whether whether this will be taxed as is or not. But for MAT purposes, this will be a gain that I'm very clear about. But from your normal income tax filing standpoint, since this is a reduced payment which you have got, I think that is the only deduction which you will ultimately get in the form of your tax or tax payouts. So I don't see any deferred tax being accounted on account of these lease payouts, which is currently sitting here. Okay, now we've seen a rebate part, which is have given some portion as a concession. So there will be businesses which will be given complete, so rents will be completely forgiven for a certain period, and there can be changes in other terms and conditions also. Let's look at this example where we have said that a lessee is paying a monthly rent of 1,000 rupees and the lessor has agreed to forgive 6 months. However, and with no future adjustment to rental. However, he said that I will charge you an interest for that period for which I am forgiving you. So there's in a way kind of the benefit what he is receiving is 992 only as against 1,000. It's another way of putting it out probably. I have not personally seen or have heard these type of transactions being entered, at least the interest part being charged. Either one has given a rebate or they have completely forgiven, but by forgiving again charging interest is something which I have not seen practically, but that can also be a possibility. So in effect, the net impact is 992 on your rebate what you are getting. So 80 rupees is more in the nature of your finance cost. So here again, the 1,000 rupees what the company has received as a benefit can be directly taken into profit and loss account if modification accounting is applied, or if a practical expedient is applied. If you apply modification accounting, then this 1,000 is a reduced cash flow, and as I said, you need to do the fair valuation of liability as well as right of use asset, which will reduce the outflow for the company and therefore reduce the liability and ROU, and therefore the corresponding impact on depreciation will change. So right now here it is 100 because we have taken everything to P&L immediately. When I say immediately, it's only for the ease here, but this would have been spread across the 6 months because that's the benefit period. But on an overall year basis, assume that that's a full impact taken here, and therefore the amortization will be of 100, which will be a normal right of use charge, which will be taken in the profit and loss account. Next, deferral of lease payment. This is very similar to what our first example was. Here, the fixed lease payment of 1,000 at the beginning of each month. Non-cancelable lease term is on 20th February 2022. contract does not include any extension, termination, or purchase option, and the discount rate is assumed to be 0 at the commencement date, and thus the liability values will be equivalent to ROU, and therefore monthly lease payment is 2,000 rupees here, right? Okay, so then here on 1st July, lessor agrees to defer the 3 months of lease payment originally due in July, August, September to January 2021. There is no non-lease component to the contract, and there are no other changes to the terms and conditions of the lease, right? So whether the first question is whether this apply, whether this is a modification or not, for somebody to apply the practical expedient or not, right? And if you actually look at, nothing else is changing. He's not charging any interest. He's not significantly changing the payout model. All he's saying is, whenever there is lockdown, don't pay me anything. I'm happy to forgive my interest. You can enjoy that money in your account for those 3 months. You start paying me that as and when the things are back to normal, and ensure that that has been paid before an agreed date, and with that you are done. So here, if you apply Ind AS 116, the answer you will get to is that this is not a modification at all, because there is no substantive change in the pricing, and there is no great rent concession which is being given to the lessee, and therefore he need not change the accounting here. All he has to do is, his liability will not reduce till he is making payment. He will continue to amortize the right of use asset. He'll continue to accrue the interest to ensure that the liability is properly accreted, and he'll not do any accounting with respect to this particular change which has happened. Now, this is very critical, and a lot of people will have this situation, and by mistake they may end up applying a revised discount rate to this in form of modification accounting, which should not be done, because here nothing much has changed substantively. So no accounting is required at this stage relating to this concession which the company has received, because there is no substantive change in any of the terms and conditions. Company is also not received any significant benefit. All it has benefited is a notional interest which they have gained over a period of 3-month period, or whatever period for which they got a deferment for, because there is no interest or any other terms which are changed here. Assuming the same facts, right? Let's look at how does this change when I change some other terms within this, wherein it says that you pay me fixed monthly installment, or fixed monthly, your fixed monthly payout is reduced by 25. As against that, you pay me a variable lease, and no other elements are changed, right? So here now there will be a modification, because now I've changed the terms itself completely. As against a fixed 100, now I've reduced it to fixed 75, because it's reduced by 25, plus now I'm making a variable component. Earlier there was no variable component there, right? So there was no variable component. Now there is a variable component which is now going to come in. So with this, there will be a lease modification which is required to be accounted, and if you had not had a practical expedient here, then you would have had to revise the cash flows and therefore do a modification accounting. However, in the given scenario, the original terms and conditions of the contract has substantively changed, right? So one of the 4 conditions in for COVID related application was original terms should not substantively change other than the payout. Here, by bringing in the variable consideration part, it has substantively changed. So therefore, COVID-19 related practical expedient cannot be applied if you bring in the variable lease component here. That means this needs to mandatorily go through a lease accounting under Ind AS 116. This is very important. So if you see on the left hand side, right, we had a case where there was no modification, because nothing else has changed, only deferment was made. It's very similar case pattern, only one element which was changed, only one, okay, only one element which was changed here was I introduced a variable lease component here, which is a 3% of monthly turnover, is something which has been brought in new. So this is a disguise which one has to be very careful when some of these are drafted, to say whether practical experience can be applied or not. And if you go wrong here, your reporting may not be appropriate and may not be in line with the standards, right? And therefore it is very important to identify such embedded changes and see whether this substantively changes my original terms or not, because all it says is that there can be rent rebatements or changes which can happen to my original payment. So there can be deferment, forgiven, etc. But here I'm bringing in altogether a different mechanism to make the payment by changing the original terms, and which is substantive in nature, and therefore lease modification is required to be applied. Okay, moving on. Now let's look at cases. So I think on illustration 5, I've tried to cover as part of my original illustrations itself, where if lessee does not apply the amendment, how should one account for the forgiven lease? I think I'll just leave this for understanding. Largely the case facts are very similar to what we have used there. What we say here is that under the new, if one is not applying the practical experience, then lease modification has to be applied, wherein your lease asset as well as lease liability will come down, as well as your discount rate. So all these three elements will change if you apply the lease modification accounting, and all of that has to be of a current date. Okay. So here again, if you see, I think this again we discussed same fact pattern. Here it's only the deferment which is happening here from the. So the earlier one was only deferment. Here it's the full waiver, and accordingly we need to change the asset value as well as liability value for the rent which was been forgiven. Again, we have discussed this particular change also in terms of rent concession on deferral of lease, and if the amendment has not been applied, how should we account for this? I've used the same case facts and same pattern. I've done the evaluation to tell you that whether it's a modification or not. And if there is a modification, your discount rate, your revised payment schedule has to be carried at the current fair value or current discounted values to bring that effect into the picture. Okay, this is very interesting one. In approach 1, accounting for forgiveness as a negative variable lease payment, and in the approach 2, accounting for forgiveness as a resolution of contingency that fixes previously variable lease payment. Certain of the contracts can have force majeure or conditions which would have possibly not taken COVID as a situation, but there could be clauses which would say that in case there is a force majeure or any of the changes which will impact my rent payout, then I will not pay this for during this period. So certain force majeure or things could be built into the contracts. In Indian scenario, I have not seen too many lease contracts where lessor has given such benefits to the lessee to say that if payouts are if business is not going well during certain periods, then you don't necessarily have to make those payments. And in case you have such payouts in that scenario, this has to be factored in. You'll have to excuse me for a minute. I'm running out of battery. Just give me a moment and I'll be back. Sorry, excuse me for 1 second. Yeah. I'm sorry, my apologies. I ran out of battery. Had to pull one in very quickly. Yes. So here, I think one has to look at the terms and conditions very carefully to see how rent concessions, if they are built into your original contract, can practical experience be applied to this scenario or not. Wherever it is built into the agreement and variable lease payment are taken into the consideration, and due to this scenario, there is a trigger. So in their original estimate, they would have factored in certain assumptions to build that, right? And now that is a true up which is coming in. So as per the current standard, whenever such contingency is resolved, you account for that contingency as a variable lease rent and directly take that into P&L. So applying practical experience is not something which has been thought through for these kind of cases. Where such cases are not been particularly discussed, then you apply the practical experience and still you can take that benefit to profit and loss account. However, if those lease payments are not clearly or if they are largely dependent on a contingency, and they were to change the original terms, then you may end up revising your lease liability and right of use asset, which is more in the case of approach 2. Moving on, lease accounting for COVID-19 related rent concession on a deferral of lease payment, applying the amendment. Here, if you see, restaurant Y leases space in shopping mall for lesser than. Term of lease is fixed payment for of rupees 600 semi-annually in arrears. It is non-cancelable, cancelable. Starts on 1st January, ends on 30th June. Contract does not include any non-lease component. Discount rate is 5%. As a direct consequence of COVID-19 pandemic, on 1st July, Lesser Z agrees to defer the lease payment originally due on 31st December 2020 to 30th June 2021. There are no other changes to the terms and conditions of the lease. We've done a clear step-by-step assessment of these terms. Here the discount rate is already there. Earlier it was 0 and somebody else was charging a discount. Here we have removed that all discount elements. We have discussed those scenarios in our previous example also, but put down an example by eliminating each condition and then again presenting it for your understanding in terms of how each variable, if they are moved, how does that impact the ultimate presentation. So on 1st July 2020, the restaurant, if they are applying this amendment, the present value of lease discounted at this will be 1,157, and lease liability immediately after rent concession will be 114. So they will debit the liability by 14 and credit the profit and loss account by 14 to record the reduction in lease liability arising from the rent concession, and depreciation of the right of use asset continues over the remaining lease term. Here there is a benefit which is coming in here by because it's a 6 monthly thing, appropriately factored into this part because it is spread over this period. So your immediate liability is also reduced, whereas there is an impact of 14 on the P&L. The next one is lease accounting for COVID-19 related rent concession on deferral of lease payment, applying the amendment. Again, the approach to account for deferral as a resolution of contingency that fixes previously variable lease payment. The accounting under this approach would be same as under approach 1, except the credit of 14 would be recognized as an adjustment to right of use asset rather than the credit to profit and loss account, because here the you are not applying the practical experience, and therefore this is an adjustment which is going to your lease asset which is recognized. Another approach is accounting for deferral of lease payment as if the lease is unchanged. And in this approach, Y continues to account for lease liability using the rights and obligation of existing lease. The lessee's payment originally due on 31st will remain on balance sheet until 30th June because there is no payout which has happened. Interest expense for 6 months will remain same as original amortization, and depreciation of right of use asset will continue over the remaining lease term. So practically there is nothing much we are changing here, because it's only the payment deferral which has happened, and they will be, and again this is an example which we spoke earlier also. If nothing else changes, then you practically make only payments when they are due, and then continue to accrue the interest on under the natural or under the routine period, and then reduce the liability as and when those payments are made, and the amortization will continue under the original terms. So these are direct extracts from the standard which I've put down here. So if you see, these are the places where the changes have been brought in. So paragraph 46A, 46B, 60A, C20A, C20B has been amended to bring these changes. For rent concessions for lessees, again within C20A, rent concession has been defined to say that how opening balance has to be adjusted if the periods are going before or prior. So that is something which we talked about. And then disclosure, disclosures, the fact that the optional, that the practical expedient has been taken. If not taken, you don't necessarily have to disclose, but if it is taken, then you have to disclose the amount and the amount recognized in profit and loss account. So these are a few things which has to be made from a disclosure standpoint. Chetan bhai, you want to stop here for Ind AS 116 related questions, or we take all the questions at the end? Chetan bhai? Am I visible and audible to everyone? I see a paused button here.
Yes, Amit, you are visible and audible.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I think if you have to take questions at the end, I'll move on with the changes in business combination definition. So Ind AS 113 brings out a narrow scope amendment to the definition of business, wherein what activities have to be their minimum in a business to qualify as a business has been brought in. So earlier, so if you see, there were three elements, right? One, there has to be an input, there has to be a process, and then there has to be an output for a transaction to qualify as a business. If you have any of these as a missing element historically, then this will not qualify as a business. Slowly, business definition was modified to make output not very relevant, because they said that if you are able to produce an output with the input and the processes, then it can qualify as a business. So that was a change which was brought in. For process, there was another change which was made to say that there has to be a market participant. So if the buyer, by applying the market participant logic, is able to add his own, or is able to buy the missing element and then operate and produce an output, it will still qualify as a business. So that market participant thing was creating a lot of confusion in terms of how does one evaluate that and then determine whether it's a business or not. So this is where this change became very important and essential, that one, there has to be an input, and the significant focus has been put on the process. It says that a substantive process has to be there in place for an item or for an asset which has been acquired to be a business or not. And that substantive means that which is very critical for one to produce an output. There cannot be a large missing element out of the activity which a market participant can by itself involve, get in out here, or the buyer can bring in here to produce an output. It should on itself largely be able to produce an output. So that's the very welcome change in my view has been brought, because a lot of business combinations were avoided, or accounting was avoided, because output was not there, so they accounted this as an asset. Therefore all assets and liabilities were not truly fair valued, and other factors were not considered, and certain transactions which were actually an asset ended up being accounted in the form of business, because by applying market participant logic, things which were purely an asset purchase from a management standpoint ended up being accounted as business combination. So that anomaly to large extent will go to rest by some of these very fine changes which has been brought into Ind AS 103. As I said, the minimum requirement to be a business market participant has been removed. Now there are very good examples and guidance given for determining whether an acquired process is substantive or not within the standard. Earlier, this was something which was missing. By giving this finer examples, it will make the practitioners it will provide practitioners a very good toolkit to evaluate their transactions from these various examples to see whether it's a business or whether the process is substantive or not. And this is like one of the very I would say an important change which has been brought. I think other than the change of the term business itself, is optional concentration test to permit a simplified assessment. So if you see the new age companies which are being acquired, a lot of their value actually sits in one particular asset. And by applying concentration test, and most of the companies which acquire these assets are actually acquiring an asset, they're not acquiring a company in itself, because a significant portion of the value actually sits in the intangible of that company and not on the other related part. I think a classic example which comes to my mind is the WhatsApp acquisition, right, which Facebook did. So if you apply Ind AS 103 to that accounting, they may actually end up accounting WhatsApp acquisition as an asset acquisition as against a business combination, even though they would have got along with that related employees and processes and outputs, etc. But by applying concentration test in this scenario, they could have easily qualified that as an asset acquisition as against a business combination, because and they were abnormally valued, right? And then practitioners had challenge here to determine how much is the intangible value, and a lot of portion used to go and sit in goodwill, which will be sitting there only for impairment test, and companies would fight for it and then continue to defend it for a longer period, and suddenly there will be an impairment which will come into P&L. To avoid all of these scenarios, this optional concentration test has come as a great blessing to a lot of practitioners, because a lot of these new age companies which are bought, significant value sits in intangible. So as against going through a business combination route where everything is fair valued and a goodwill being set up, all this value now sits in intangible asset, which can be amortized and easily phased out of balance sheet based on the consumption or use of that asset, which I believe is a key change and a very progressive change which has been brought in Ind AS 103. These amendments are effective April 1, 2020 and applies prospectively. Early application is not permitted for these amendments. To spend a little more time on optional test, I thought it will make sense for me to give you a little more detail here, because there is something which can change accounting significantly, and if somebody takes a different view, answer can be very different. As I said, again, this is an optional test. This in itself does not determine whether an asset is a business or not. This is a simplified optional test which can be applied, and accordingly disclosures have to be made in financial statements to say whether a transaction is a business or not. This is something which we have done ahead of time. This is a public information now. So for one of the large pharma companies which we audit, we have applied concentration test model for a very large molecule which they purchased. Sorry, my apologies. There was some disturbance at my place. I'm sure you can understand that. Entities may elect this because this is not a mandatory test, and this is not an accounting policy wherein it has to be applied on all cases. They can choose on a transaction by transaction basis where they want to apply and not apply, which is a very good freedom which has been given to entities. Concentration test is met if substantially all of the fair value of the gross asset and not the net asset, and this is the clear distinction. So because when it comes to net, there's a lot of funding element also which comes into the play, wherein it reduces the net value, and they may have liabilities, etc., which may significantly reduce the net value, and then the fair value can easily be assigned to it, and it may appear that the enterprise value is more or less equal to that, but that is not the case. Here it is on a gross basis. So the gross fair value of the asset, which in this case an intangible, has to be substantially relating to that asset itself and nothing else. So the teams, etc., which comes along with that may not have a significant role to play once the product is established, right? And I'm actually practically in case of WhatsApp, so I'm practically buying the product. I don't care whether the team comes with that or not, because I have the code and all the know-hows relating to the WhatsApp. And now there is not much left in here. So if team comes good, not comes good, I can redeploy them. So all of those are irrelevant decisions from my acquisition standpoint. And by applying concentration test, I may avoid recognizing goodwill, etc. Basically recognize an intangible, amortize over a period of whatever is a reasonable period for that, and then be done with it, as against doing an impairment test every year, going through the rigor of drawing of financial performance for that asset every year. So all of these can be avoided if you choose this option. And the last one is the test. If the test is met, the set of activities and asset is determined not to be a business, and no further assessment is needed. And therefore, as I said, intangible asset can be recognized with respect to this. So these were the key changes in business. Coming to Ind AS 109, as I mentioned in my initial opening comments, that Ind AS 109 and 107 required some changes from a hedge accounting standpoint, because LIBOR is no more a benchmark rate. So now with the change in benchmark rate, if you apply a stricter interpretation of 109, your hedge accounting rules has failed, and therefore you will not be able to continue to designate your cash flow hedges as hedges if your interest rate benchmarks have changed. But with this reform, which has now come in, so now IFRS as well as Ind AS have made this change in respective standards to bring in that flexibility to say that if you are changing your benchmark rate because of this reform change, then you continue to do your hedge accounting in a normal course of business as against de-designating them. So that's a very big change, a progressive change which has been brought in here. Otherwise, all the hedges would have become ineffective. Largely, financial sector is a sector which will be impacted by this, and they are the ones who will strongly apply the standard. For people who have taken interest rate swaps, for them this might be a very relevant discussion, because they would need a benchmark rate to say when they create a hypothetical derivative. That's where they need a benchmark rate, and that is where this is benchmarked change, which can be now brought in to continue to account for that as a cash flow hedge. Reclassifying the amount accumulated in cash flow reserve. Again, here interest rate benchmark change, which is because of the reform which has been brought in. If your original rate has changed, even this is been permitted now, that you can reclassify the amount accumulated in the cash flow hedge reserve using the revised rate under the new banking norms. This is something which we spoke about along with the first item, that economic relationship between hedge item and hedging relationship again can be redesignated, and your hedge risk need not change. You can continue with the revised rate which is being used for the purpose of hedge accounting. With respect to these changes, I think disclosure is required. You again are exempted from giving Ind AS 8 related disclosures because this is again a practical experience which has been brought in to factor in the international reforms which has happened so by eliminating LIBOR, the reforms which has come in to factor in that these changes have been brought in. So it's only the factual statement which has to be made in the financial statement without presenting any prior year related information in the financial statements. Moving on to the definition of material, Ind AS 1 and 8 are the two standards which were largely impacted by the term material. Historically, material definition had economic decision being a significant focus area, because one has to have an economic decision wherein it would have eliminated other stakeholders from the definition. It's only the users whose economic decision will get impacted would have been only factored in. Then materiality dependent on size, nature, and the surrounding circumstances. So even this part has been modified or done away with to bring in a more simplified version wherein it says that information as against, if you see in the prior version, it is more related to an item. Here it includes information which includes a disclosure also, not only an amount but a disclosure also. Earlier it was auditors who would only look at the disclosure part, not the practitioners or companies. With this amendment, in fact, now the disclosures are also equally important, or any other information which you are putting out, even if it's voluntary, it cannot be a misleading information, right? So information is material if omitting, misstating, or obscuring it could reasonably be expected to influence decisions that the primary users of general purpose financial statements make on the basis of those financial statements which provide financial information about a specific reporting entity. So if you see, there is a significant structural change which has happened in the definition of material. One, they have in a way broadened it to say that it can be a primary user of general purpose financial statement. There it was more financial statements driven, so which could have been extended, could be narrowly interpreted in the court of law, and people would have got away with the definition of material, etc., with a specific context, nature, etc., has been done away with. And information has to be looked in totality. That is what the new definition brings in, which is very, very critical. That it should not be looked at in isolation, but to see if it can influence the decision of the user. And if that information is not presented properly, then this can be a significant deterrent. I'll give you a very practical experience here, right? I'm sure you would have dealt with segment reporting. A lot of people look at segment reporting more from a competition standpoint to say if competition is presenting XY, I will present XY and I will not go out of whack in terms of my presentation. Whereas internally, I may have a completely different yardstick to evaluate the performance and allocate the capital. And they would largely use the argument of materiality, etc., to say that my gross margins are same, my risks are same, my other things are same, and therefore by aggregating this, I'm not misleading any of the information which is put out in public. But when you apply this new definition and read segment reporting standard, you will come to probably a conclusion that the segments, the way management looks at, needs to be presented more or less in that very same manner as against aggregating and trying to see what the competition is presenting. And that is what this new definition puts out, saying that any information which is material, if it is omitted, misstated, or obscuring. So in this case, if you're obscuring it by not presenting it, because this could have impacted or the decision of the users in the form of segment reporting. Whereas you had readily available that you had that information readily available and you were using for capital allocation, and you are not presenting this to the general public to assess or to understand your capital allocation strategy, and therefore this new definition would have thrown them out and then would have put them to state that this is materially misstated. Again, I think this goes into a little more detail. I would not like to read this out, but I think the essence of this definition, as we discussed in the previous slide, is to ensure that the information is presented in a very clear manner. All material items are presented together and they're not scattered and not embedded there just from a compliance standpoint, but are presented in a more meaningful manner. I've seen financial statements where people try and build in things, and all of these were not clearly coming out in the prior material definition, right? As long as you're able to comply with it in some ways, in some form, if information is coming in implied, or even though if in an implied manner, you would have still passed a regulatory scanner. But by now applying this material information framework, you need to make your information absolutely clear, and those statements have to be absolutely as required by the standard, as again making them vague and unclear and trying to bury into the financial statement without they creating a proper meaning. Classic examples which I've seen where people have tried to bring in this vagueness in financial instrument disclosures, where credit risk concentration are not presented properly. And then they try and write that no single customer, the requirement is concentration test, and anything above a threshold needs to be disclosed. They would write it in a negative manner. If somebody is above 10%, they'll write no customer is about 20%, and they were trying to trying to avoid a disclosure. So some of these will now go off the hook, where now things have to be presented more in a clearer manner and as required under the standards. This is a very interesting change which has, or amendment which has come in, wherein it says that a not adjusting event for a reporting period or material, then non-disclosure could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decision that the primary user of general financial statement would have got impacted. An entity shall disclose the following for each material category for non-adjusting event after the reporting period: nature of event, estimate, and statement that. So, and this was again, and at least in my view, I have applied this from a COVID-related disclosure. So, COVID in some form was a event which has happened, say post March. A large portion, the large impact started coming in post March, while the lockdown would have been announced on March 22nd, and it was only a week's time where the businesses got impacted, and people would have in some form would have, and some businesses would have been running. But this is clearly a subsequent event, which was a non-adjusting one, and this was clearly a material event, wherein the disclosures in the earlier version you could have avoided disclosing this, because this is something which does not impact your existing balance sheet positions in some form, but this definitely had a significant impact on your operations. And therefore, with this important amendment, I think COVID-related disclosures as part of the current financial statements in subsequent event note will now make more sense. And I think guidance has not been clearly brought out: the nature of event and estimated impact, financial impact on the future periods, which again was not usually part of our reporting in the past. And if that cannot be estimated, that fact again has to be mentioned in the financial statements. Again, India's 34 also had the definition of materiality, wherein it requires I think in no place quantification is done for the materiality. It is left to the individual entities to determine what is more appropriate or what is more appropriate number for them from a materiality standpoint. Listed entities and private entities have taken different thresholds for themselves. Usually, we have seen benchmarks being revenue, profit, assets are the usual benchmarks which are taken by the companies to set the materiality. And materiality ranges from 1% to 5% for depending upon the threshold one takes, and see whether it is material to the economic users of the financial statements or not. This is again a very important change, I would say, in the current scenario. Again, this will be a very practical change, I would say. A lot of companies, as part of their plans, would go for restructuring, like closing down, layoffs, etc. Some of them can be post balance sheet, and they may try and push those costs to the closing period because to show a better rosy picture for the current period. So this change has in some way has put down some of the restructuring plans into perspective. In India, we had only VRS being largely a public kind of thing. Now broader restructurings are also taking place, wherein closed down, layoffs, etc. Are very important features of restructuring to ensure that the business is up and running. So what does the standard says here is that if you want to account for this during the current or during the period which is closed, then by the reporting date, either you should have started implementing the restructuring plan, or, and this is the key thing which has come out now, which is announce the main features of restructuring plan to those affected by it in sufficiently specific manner to raise a valid expectation in them that the entity will carry out the restructuring. And this is something which can allow, and which at least from an auditor's lens, one has to be very careful whether such communications has been made in a sufficiently specific manner to those who are affected, and therefore gather sufficient and appropriate evidence to validate that the restructuring which has been discussed, can that be accounted by the reporting date, or is that an event which is a post balance sheet date, and then accordingly relevant disclosures only to be done as against recording this. And my sense is that a lot of companies will try and use this definition to their advantage, both either to record or to postpone, right? And both would have their own interests in place to determine whether what is more appropriate in their circumstances. I think standard has now brought out very clear guidelines with respect to this, which is very simple to understand, and in some form difficult to audit the second part, or difficult to prove in the second part. But I think first part is no-brainer. The plan should have been in the implementation process, even though if it is started, you are barely set. And the second part is very critical, where you need to prove that all affected parties have been communicated about the plan, and they have a valid expectation that there is a strong sense that this will be carried out, and therefore things will ultimately be rolled out, and therefore an event of a date when this decision was taken, and therefore creating a constructive obligation on the company. So that's the more or less form. So I think without this definition also, I've seen various practices here. Companies have either accounted in the previous period using constructive obligation, and post-reporting period again using the constructive obligation definition, saying that I've not still created an expectation here because I can always roll back this plan. So that's where the fact that valid expectation in them that the entity will carry out the restructuring has to be there. So if it is only to create some cookie jar reserve, then one has to be very careful with respect to intent and the representation which one gets to validate this particular change. I think with this, I have covered all the key amendments. I would request Chetan Bhai to open up for the discussions on the changes which we have discussed.
Sure, Amit. I think thank you so much. It was really very important lucid presentation. Lot many key examples you covered. I think that was the most important thing, and that is the main objective of keeping this session. So, Amit, we have one question at this junction.
Yeah.
Bhavik Doshi has asked question that company has modified lease in March 20 accounts. Now, can it be undone in June 20 accounts, because this amendment was not there when the
Correct.
March 20 accounts were finalized? Now they wanted to again apply this. Can they do it?
So for March 20, they cannot do. So I don't think they will go for a restatement mode. But practical experience can be applied from 1st April 20, right? So for the portion which has not been applied, they can use this practical. Okay, I think if I understand the question, they have applied the lease modification accounting as of April 20 or March 20. So now they want to undo the lease accounting and then take the practical experience in the current period. Is that the question?
I also think the same thing. I also guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Bhavik replied, yes.
Yes. If you have already applied lease modification as of March 20, then I don't think standard gives you a leeway to unwind that option and apply the practical expedient. So that option has not been discussed here. However, it says that you can apply it retrospectively. Using that guidance, I can change the prior year number by applying that, and then impact of that can be taken in retained earnings, and then apply the practical expedient for the current period. So without going to the restatement mode, the early application part which has come out, right? So that is something which can be used for the previous period to undo that part.
Okay, so you are saying early application is permitted doesn't mean that you cannot basically apply from 1st April. So giving impact on retrospective application, impact on opening return earning of 1st April is not permitted.
It is permitted. It is permitted under the standard.
Permitted. So in that case, there is no need to change. There is no need to change your March 20 accounts, right?
Correct.
Okay, fine. Bhavik, I hope the answer is clear. Right. Any other questions? Because there ought to be a lot of many confusions in these amendments, and
no, I am sure there will be a lot of questions. So I'm hoping that I was hoping a lot more questions with respect to this. Because trust me, I have good 40 plus accounts which I oversee personally, and each of them had a very different type of modification. A lot of these are like practical changes which have actually happened with this, and I'll give you one more example not covered as part of the presentation. Is there is a change in lease component is intact, non-lease component they have made the change, right? So which is very unique. So how do you account for that? Can practical experience be applied to that or not? Was a question which we were trying to debate and come to a conclusion to, because the standard only talks about the lease component and the lease payment, whereas there is a practical expedient to effect that I may choose not to apply this to non-lease component, correct? So non-lease component can be combined, and I can say that I will not separate them out and then see that as a single lease rental and then evaluate this. Whereas when benefit comes, it is only towards the non-lease component, not to the lease component, whether practical expedient has to be applied or not. I think my view there is that practical expedient has to be applied because you have taken an option 1 to combine both of them. And now that only benefit is coming to non-lease, you should not be kept away from the benefits which are extended to the lease component. And therefore, if you have taken a choice to combine that, then you are also eligible to take that benefit to both the part, right? That's one. In case I have taken a decision to separate that out, then obviously the lease portion need not be touched. For non-lease portion, any which way, the accounting model is very different, and therefore those payments will automatically get adjusted because they are accounted as and when things are consumed, as and when things are consumed, as against you setting a ROU or a lease liability.
Right. I think there's no further question. If you want to discuss any of your particular questions, case studies like these, there's a time for. In case if you feel, I know a lot of things you have covered already, but
Yeah,
still if you feel something is to be shared.
I mean, how many of us will be auditors here? I mean, any idea you would have? Because from a
I think majority, more than 80% auditors, 70%.
Okay. I think here few things I would want to share if we have more number of auditors, that whenever you see a concession agreement or rent concession amendment or change which has affected, as I said, be very careful with respect to the fact that the changes which has been brought in, are there any other embedded changes which has been put in there in disguise of changing this change. I took one example where variable lease was brought in. So there could be another form also wherein you can see that kind of change coming in. There can be reduction in the property size, you giving away any portion there. Those are substantive changes. Then you cannot apply practical experience. You need to apply lease modification. You will see those in your own examples also. I'm particularly sure because there will be a lot of retail clients you will have, there will be a lot of restaurants, etc. will have these kinds of changes, wherein it will significantly change not only the payment term but the other elements of the lease component. So this practical expedient, while client may come back to you and you may be pushed to look at it little more differently and then try and take that benefit to PNL immediately, because some of them may have those pressures as well. In that scenario, I think one has to be very careful to identify whether the original terms other than the payment, are they changing significantly or not, and if they are changing, then I think lease modification only has to be applied. You cannot take the practical experience. That's number one. Number two, again on the lease accounting, be very careful with the discount rates. If you choose to apply lease modification, and not necessarily a practical expedient will work out for you, so that's an option, right? And you should not blindly go with practical expedient and try and take things to PNL. If you are looking from a longer term perspective, reducing the ROU and liability lighten balance sheet. And if you have a favorable discount rate available now, and with a higher discount rate, ROU will actually further come down. And if that makes sense, and your EBITDA can also be improved if there is a higher discount rate now. So having these factors also, have these factors also been considered is something which you need to take into account before you make a decision whether you want to go for a practical expedient or not, because it's not necessary that it is always beneficial to take immediate impact in the PNL, right? There could be a long-term impact coming out of it, which can play out on our EBITDA and valuation. So one has to be mindful of that. Third, I feel from a lease accounting standpoint is, I think a lot of companies will reach out to you for advice in terms of what is a general reduction rate or general modification which I can get from lessor, because I think I feel a lot of people consult CAs, right, to help them build up a plan in terms of what is the loss preposition, etc. I think that's where again I see a significant opportunity for our fellow members to use these discounting models along with the loss which they are or their clients would be incurring, to help them advise what will be a better negotiation point, and not only go by 1 month, 2 month thing, and look at, because this benefit is up to June 21, right? So it's full 1 year and 3 months, so like 15 months of benefit is what you are looking at practically from a standard standpoint, right? And this impact in my view is going to last beyond 24 months very easily. So I see a significant opportunities for CA community, at least the fellow CAs who are there on this call can take this opportunity to advise their clients to look at these negotiations and create a more win-win situation. I think in one of our clients, we advised them to go for a variable payment mode by significantly reducing fixed, even though they could not apply the practical experience. But I think to a large extent, they have now linked their, and this is something which I've seen in the airport model, right? And which we bought and now used here for negotiation for one of our clients, where I think both parties will have win-win and you will not have an immediate cash flow pressure and therefore lightning time. So because immediate rebate and etc. are more for companies which are very well established, their operations got impacted, everybody wants to get benefit out of it because their operations in some way were impacted and cost will always be there. But this is also an important decision making point, and this is a pure financial decision. I think that's the good part of it, and we can play a very important role in helping our clients decide what is a better option and also present to them the accounting of it. Now that you've seen how accounting works, you can also present to them so how will this be reflected from an accounting standpoint. So these are few tips I had from a lease accounting application standpoint. On business combinations, this is a very big change which has come actually, and people who are applying business combination, please spend time to understand if you can help companies apply this concentration test and get out of that, you save a lot of time and effort of the company. As I told you, you don't have to do a yearly impairment test. You don't have to spend your resources building up those cash flows, etc. It lightens your balance sheet over a period of time. So there are a lot of benefits coming out of this. So that is something which is very critical, and if that one part can be used very effectively for companies. And then second, I think the business definition as such has now been very simplified, and a lot of very good examples are given in the standard to apply and see whether a set of processes qualify as a substantive process or not. And a lot of clients will need your input, your advice to determine this, because this has significant tax complications or significant tax implications also, whether a transaction is accounted as a business or not, apart from slum sale in India. But I think outside India also you will have a lot of these transactions being discussed, so you can structure them in a manner where it is more beneficial for the companies. They can get deduction under the Companies Act. I'm talking more from a buyer standpoint. Things from a seller standpoint, I think more settled practitioners very well, have very well set rules how to qualify for slum sale, etc. But from a buyer standpoint, if one is able to account for this as an asset, where goodwill generally is not allowed in the income tax, if you are able to apply that, then those benefits definitely flow to the company. So that's where probably you can apply these standards to your benefit. And the third one, which was the last amendment which we spoke about, I don't know how many people or how many of you are applying hedge accounting, but that's a very simpler change, and that was something which was debated and which was expected to come. So I'll not get into too much of detail for that. Two other changes, which is material. The definition of material now makes it more onerous in my view, because now you have to be more fairer and more clearer in your presentation. A lot of things you could have buried earlier, now you cannot bury that anymore. You need to really think hard and see whether it impacts or not, and then have a clear trail. And looking at the current regulatory environment in the country, you need to have a proper backup for your decisions, whether it's materiality and whether you are giving up any disclosure or not choosing to present it in a full manner. You need to have a proper backup from a materiality standpoint, not an audit materiality, but from a company standpoint. I'm thinking about. But this material definition is for company, not for auditors. So one has to be careful. So who are the CFOs and finance professionals here? Now the onus will fall on you also as professionals, and ICAI and other regulators will look up to you. So you will play a very important role in defining what is materiality. And in my view, I think companies in their charter should define materiality and put a number and a guiding factor to it for evaluation. And if you don't do that, you will always struggle to defend it at a later point in time. So that will be my simple tip: that get it documented and flashed within your scheme of things, wherein it can be used as a benchmark or a evaluation factor. That's something which we do religiously in audits, right? That's something that now has to be copied for corporate world also. The last change which we spoke about was on the restructuring plan. This was a very fluid standard. A lot of people took calls on this side and that side both. Um, and then they tweaked the facts to their benefits. Now the standard has simplified it. At least there is a more clear guidance. Either it has to be implemented or should have been communicated to all the people who are impacted by this, and then there's a valid expectation in their mind that this plan will be carried out. It's kind of isn't held for sale kind of scenario where though it has not said in 12 months time I will mandatorily affect that, but I think the language more or less in that line to say that management has all the intentions to carry out this, and this is not only a window dressing kind of thing which is done. And this can be very useful. I think clients will come to you for advice to understand when should I account for the cost, how can I postpone or prepone, right? Either ways. So you, with this standard, you now know very clearly how to advise your clients in terms of whatever be their objective. You can accordingly advise them to be on the right side of the. So yeah, these were some of the things which I thought I'll re-emphasize from an implementation standpoint for our context.
Very useful tips. I think Amit, these all are going to be very useful. One more question from Bhavik, that any listed company you know have disclosed Q1 in Q1 on an exchange?
Sorry, what they have disclosed?
Q1 about Ind AS 116 rent concession. If any listed company is disclosing Q1 reporting, any idea about any company? So that they can disclose.
This number, I don't think the rent concession was at least the results which have come till now. Nobody got a big concession out there. So there is one company, not an Indian company, but a US public company. This is already a public information. We have disclosed that it's WNS Holding. So you can browse their 6K filing. There they have disclosed the rent concession benefit which they have given. So that's about $300K, which they disclosed in their filing. So that is something which you can refer to for the presentation purpose.
Great. And a couple of requests from Anuj, Anju, and Brijesh. Great presentation. I think presentation you will share to us, and we will share to all
yes, I will share a PDF copy of this, and then you can circulate that to our fellow members.
Sure. So I think Amit, there is no further questions, and it means that you explained them a lot easily. And very important, I think, with respect to Ind AS 116 103 business combination is again very important thing. If we really apply this business definition in practical sense, it can really make a lot of life easier for the acquirer. So yes. Practical insights are also useful. And thank you so much, Amit, for sparing a valuable time. And all participants have immensely benefited by your presence. And we look forward to you to invite you again in the.
Thank you, Chintan Bhai. I truly appreciate the opportunity given, and I hope some of our experiences will be more useful, and some of the tips which I've shared will help them expand their value addition to their clients and make the reporting much more stronger.
Certainly. Thank you so much. Thanks to all participants. With this, we close now this session. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.